Destination Freedom. Destination Freedom, dramatizations of the great democratic traditions of the Negro people, is brought to you by station WMAQ as a part of the pageant of history and of America's own Destination Freedom. Midwest America has long been the cradle for some of the nation's most outstanding creative writers. Upholding the rich tradition of her region is the poet Gwendolyn Brooks of Chicago. In a chapter entitled Poet in Bronzeville, Destination Freedom introduces you to one of the new stars of Midwestern literature. Miss Brooks will read one of her own poems at the end of her story.
Somewhere in the middle of the Windy City, on a street in Bronzeville, near the end of the afternoon, a typewriter was remembering the way the neighbors looked and working out the crossword puzzle of people's lives and ideas, competing with a heavy roar of the L that hustled by so close to her window she could reach out and touch the steel pillars, or stop typing and stare back at the curious passengers for a memorable split second before the coaches were carried down the line. Then the typewriter remembers again the life in the neighborhood and clicks on until the bell rings. As she reaches up and presses the door release. Give the street door downstairs an unlocked moment. Sit back at the keys. Wonder at the assembling of the guests coming up the steps. Wonder who they are, where they came from, and why they found their way to her door. Hear their steps hit the second-floor platform. Hesitate down the hall before apartment 5. Knock boldly on the wrong door. And hear the curious Mrs. Montgomery open it.
Yeah?
My dear young lady, we're looking for a young woman who writes poetry.
Do you happen to be the poetess in the building, Mrs.
Montgomery? No, I'm glad to say the only tenant crazy enough to be doing anything like that's in apartment 1.
Apartment 1?
Come on, I'll show you. I'm sure she's in. I heard that devilish typewriter just to go. Miss Brooks! Ooh, Miss Brooks! Miss Brooks! Oh, there you are. I was just telling these people I knew you were in.
Are you the poet?
Well, I write. Won't you come in? Sit down.
Well, I'm Mrs. Winters. This is Mr. Pritchard. We're looking for new poets, miss. The Northern Society for the Discovery of New Poets heard that you were writing what might be considered verse.
And naturally, as the oldest and most respected artistic society in the Middle West, we wanted to examine your material fairly and impartially before deciding whether or not you could be admitted to the society. But I don't
Mr. Pritchard.
Yes, Mrs. Winters?
We will examine the young lady's background.
Well, I hardly see the need. After all, it's plain this isn't what we want. But if you can, young lady, tell us something of your background.
Background?
Yes. Just give us a picture of how you go about your work.
Exactly. For instance, just where do you write this poetry and...
What did you say?
I said, where do you write?
I can't hear you.
Where?
Right here.
Where?
Right here.
You don't mean it.
If you wait until the L goes by, I'll read you some of my poems.
You wait until the L scampers by and the room stops trembling. And the poet hunters calm down and look more confused than ever.
Miss Brooks, we may as well tell you that the kind of poetry our society is looking for is, well, the more cultured variety.
Miss Brooks! Miss Brooks!
Just a minute, please.
Oh, I don't want to interrupt you, Miss Brooks. I knew you had company, but I'm going out knowing you'd be home, especially since you got company. I wondered if
I'll be glad to keep your boy while you go to the store.
Oh, thank you. I'll go and fetch him now.
Now, about this poetry... you see, we were looking for the more aesthetic type, and I'm afraid you haven't got any idea.
I'm trying to find some samples.
Now we are getting somewhere.
I had a few poems over here.
Oh, Miss Brooks, I'm sorry to bother you, but I just wanted to tell you Miss Harris in Apartment 2 says that if she gets a phone call from her husband, tell her hurry on home and don't stop at the 411 Club, please.
You rummage through your files, and you know what kind of poetry the visitors to your street in Bronzeville mean. You hear off down the hall the ringing of the phone, and Larry Mitchell is coming home from the stockyards, And before he enters, you know what greeting his wife will give him. And through the thin walls, you hear them.
This is one fine time to come home, I'll say.
You said that before. What do you own it?
Oh, rent for it.
Didn't I pay that thing last week? Sure I did.
You half listen, and you pull from a pile of poems the one that tells of life in a kitchenette. You know without reading it that it's not the kind of poetry your visitors are looking for. In it are the dreams of the folks in apartment 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In it is the voice of all the kitchenette buildings.
We are things of dry hours in the involuntary plan, grayed in and gray. Dream makes a giddy sound, not strong like rent, feeding a wife, satisfying a man. But could a dream send up through onion fumes, its white and violet, fight with fried potatoes and yesterday's garbage ripening in the hall, flutter or sing an aria down these rooms, even if we were willing to let it in, had time to warm it, keep it very clean, anticipate a message, let it begin? We wonder, but not well. Not for a minute. Since number 5 is out of the bathroom now, we think of lukewarm water and hope to get in it.
You hear the voice and put away the poem and search for another to explain the way you write and the meaning of the things you see. And you remember behind it all the long years of loneliness, of the carefully kept shy girl who grew tall and thin in the busy streets of Bronzeville, unnoticed except by a mother.
Gwendolyn.
And a high school teacher who had come to explain your grades.
I'm telling you, Miss Rogers, I would have failed your daughter sure if she's in my English class if it hadn't been for the fact that I know she's not brought up that way.
Gwen, will you come in here?
And you came to face the two.
Miss Heckle says you wrote these papers. Says you sit up in school all day and write sarcastic poems about the teachers.
Well, I had finished the lessons, and I was just practicing.
Practicing to insult the teachers? Why, did you read this, Miss Rogers?
Where did she, my daughter, learn such words?
Not in my class.
Gwendolyn, you're getting just like that Johnny May. I'm all for your learning literature, but you're learning the backyard kind. What Miss Heckle's been trying to teach you is the front yard kind of literature. Now remember that.
You remember that. You, tall, thin, dark girl with shy eyes and a bold mind. And you penned a poem that had your inner voice, your inner thoughts.
I've stayed in the front yard all my life. I want to peek at the back where it's rough and untended and hungry weed grows. A girl gets sick of a rose. I want to go in the backyard now and maybe down the alley to where the charity children play. I want a good time today. My mother, she tells me that Johnny May will grow up to be a bad woman and that George will be taken to jail soon or late. On account of last winter, he sold our back gate. But I say it's fine. Honest, I do. And I'd like to be a bad woman, too, and wear the brave stockings of night black lace and strut down the streets with paint on my face.
You recall the quiet words you put down as you went the way of the average, to school and home, to school again, and the gleam of your mother's interest in your inner world. And finally she said,
Gwen, girl, I'm not sure your scribbling's worth carrying on. But anyone who does as much of it as you do ought to have it looked at.
I was thinking the same thing. In fact,
I've already thought it out. Dr. Johnson's coming to Chicago on a lecture tour, and they say he knows more about writers than anybody in the country. I'm sending him some of your work. He'll let us know when he comes to town. He'll let us know what to do with this scribbling.
And you remember the feverish days of polishing and shining up the words you wrote, and setting down the ideas that shot through your mind while you waited for that day to come. And it came. You were making your way backstage before the lecture. Your mother was stopped by the head usher.
If you have an appointment with Dr. Johnson...
Oh, but we have.
Name?
Oh, just tell him the young girl who sent him poetry.
Ma'am, a good many young girls send Dr. Johnson poetry. Name?
Rogers.
Thank you. I'll see if Dr. Johnson has time to see you, ma'am.
The usher left. The usher came back.
Dr. Johnson is terribly busy. Now, if you can come back, say, next month when he's coming through Chicago, perhaps then...
Oh, but I've already written to him, and he said he'd see us.
I'm afraid, madam.
Oh, is that Dr. Johnson coming out?
And you see, as I've said, he's very busy. Madam, please,
Dr.
madam.
Johnson!
What can I do for you, my dear woman?
I'm Mrs. Rogers. My daughter Gwendolyn here sent you some poetry to judge.
Indeed. And is this your daughter?
I am.
I don't remember your letters or your poetry. But if you want advice, young girl, forget about poetry and think of something useful. Be a poet. One should have wide experience. Where have you been?
Oh, she was in Topeka, Kansas once.
Hardly the experience that would equip her to write anything worth reading. Madam, your daughter seems to be of a very quiet nature. Let her remain so. It's best not to wake her.
It might have been best, you remember. But you were already awakened and already sensitive to the tide of human emotions that surged around the streets of Bronzeville and a Midwestern city. And you recall setting about to explore the wide world the poet needed to know, to understand. You took the first step necessary to live.
Come right in, come right in. You're looking for office work, I understand.
You're right.
Good. Experience?
Well, I just got out of junior college, and I haven't had much.
Unfortunate. What have you been doing with your spare time?
I've written some poetry.
You've been dreaming, I see. Well, it's time you woke up. Now, before I go into the details of this job, I presume you realize this 1937 depression's thrown a good many young girls your age out of work.
Yes, I'm one.
I say all that to say that if you're sensible, you'll take the job I'm offering you.
Oh, but I intend to.
And know where to start. At the bottom.
I suppose I'd have to.
Yeah, good and sensible. Now, you'll start today. I think you can use that typewriter over by the window.
I'd like to know about the salary.
Well, don't let it worry you. 8 hours a day, $8 a week. Now, if you'll just sit over there at that typewriter by the window facing the hill, good. You can get a nice view.
You sat at the typewriter, and you watched the L's go by. You had been jerked out of your young world now into another of long hours and low wages. The notes you made in your mind took on a different meaning. And as the L's stumbled back and forth between Bronzeville and the world beyond, you stopped watching it and caught it to answer an ad for a salesgirl on State Street.
Salesgirl?
Well, that's what the ad says was wanted.
You look good up and down these stores on State Street, kiddo. You see any colored salesgirls?
Isn't it about time there were?
In this day and age, kiddo, I ain't the one to say. Try the domestic department.
You remember the slow realization that you were barred from most of the jobs in your city, and that barred along with you were your neighbors, and you drew closer to them and understood. You rode the long L lines to the end of the line and tried the domestic department.
You the girl looking for housework?
Yes.
You don't look like you've had much experience, but you can stand the wages. I guess we can stand your inexperience. Go in the kitchen. Help Hattie.
You remember going into the kitchens and helping the dozens of Hatties, and still inside you the poems were formulating, and caught the dirgery of your neighbors assigned to the domestic departments.
It's usually from the inside of the door that I takes my peek at the sun, pulling off his clothes and calling it a day. 'Cause I'm getting the dishes done about that time. Not that I couldn't sneak out on the back porch a bit, but the sun and me's the same, could be. Cap the job, then to heck with it. No lulling around the old workplace, but off, spite of something to see. Yes, off till when the sun comes back. Then it's wearily back for me.
And for you it was back to the streets of Bronzeville, and to the old search for work and for time to think, and to grow and dream. And you would write down the dreams and send them off to publishers, and their remarks came back.
Very sorry, but the poem you sent us is not suitable for publication in such a magazine as we try to maintain.
We're sending back your poetry with the kind advice that your time could be better spent at some pursuit other than literature.
We absolutely cannot use any of your poetry. We are therefore sending it back to you to be disposed of in any way you see fit.
But yet you couldn't stop tinkering with images and with the compressed ideas of poems. And in your search for livelihood, your skill with words was discovered and acknowledged unexpectedly on a side street in Bronzeville when you reported to an odd house, pressed the button of a bell. And a turbaned and severe figure looked through you. You said,
I was sent here by the United States Employment Service. Is Dr. Condor in?
Come in.
They said you needed a clerk, and I can type. You see,
I know all about you, young lady. Your past is an open affair to me. Come this way.
You followed the doctor through scented doorways, past seance and medicine rooms, and came to where the clerks worked.
You'll start work in here.
What will I do?
You see the stack of letters on the table. They are from my clients who seek advice. As for those that want my medicines, you give their checks to me and the orders to the stock clerk. Those that seek only my advice, well, you answer them the best you can. Be diplomatic.
I'll try.
I know you will, my dear girl. You were born under the sign of Cancer. A good sign. I only hire employees born under that sign.
I was thinking,
I
Doctor,
know what you were thinking. Your salary. We'll arrange that discussion later. Time for my 3 o'clock reading. Be seated. Work steadily. Remember, Dr. Conger keeps a special watch over his employees, even when he is not in the house. The spirits help me. My clients are coming. Work hard, my dear girl, and the spirits will reward you as they have me.
You remember sitting down at the tall stack of letters and then thumbing through the pleas from the lost and the lonely, seekers after quick remedies and magic cures, seekers after solace and comfort, after a way out of their circles. And you felt a kinship as you typed back answers that directed and guided, and it gave you a new insight in reaching out of little people. And it gave a new lift to the doctor, too, for it wasn't long before he stopped by your typewriter.
The spirits, young lady, have been most kind to both of us.
What?
Since you've been answering letters, business has, tripled. There's something about the way you phrase your words. Indeed, a gift from the other world.
Well, I wouldn't say that.
I'd say you were destined to do even more with your words than answer correspondence.
Well, I do write poetry.
Oh, poetry. I mean something influential. You've witnessed my Monday seances.
I've heard you in there talking, if that's what you mean.
And if I had a young lady who could talk as persuasively as you write, my seance business would triple too, no?
No.
As your employer, I'm going to transfer you to the seance department. Hereafter, you'll report to me and the spirits, young lady.
Thereafter, you failed to report to the doctor's house and left him with his mail and seances. But you took away an understanding of the universality of loneliness. You saw that among your neighbors on the streets in Bronzeville, there were other poets who understood. And one hot summer evening, during an intermission between the search for jobs and the day's grind, a friend came to you and said,
Say, Gwen, you've been around here writing poetry and trying to draw pictures of the South Side.
Oh, sure, you too.
I admit it. There's some would-be poets getting together over at the South Side Community Arts Center. Inez Stark from Poetry Magazine's going to supervise for a while. How about coming in? Who knows? You might even learn how to write the stuff.
You went with Margaret Goss, and you sat down with neighbors who knew the people of the South Side even better than you, knew the meaning of poverty, and they went to work to frame the feelings of a bronze city within the exacting lines of poems. And in the evenings when you walked home, Margaret had another proposal.
Say, girl, there's a guy in class in the back row who writes stuff just like yours, only better.
What's he look like?
I'll call him. Hey, Henry! Henry! This guy's liable to be your husband. Pay attention, girls. Henry!
You paid attention and met a shy, quiet boy named Blakely who had walked the same streets you had.
And the way I figure, writing poetry about Chicago's just taking, well, say, the life of anybody, or the life of a street, and putting in it all the glory you'd find in the wide world. If you live on one street in Bronzeville and know it well enough, well, it's like knowing any street, anywhere. You don't have to travel. It's all here.
You listened to the boy, and you understood his poems, and he understood you. And on a street in Bronzeville, you found love and companionship, and a husband who found a kitchenette apartment near the Jackson Park L. And the neighbor from apartment 5 gladly opened the door, welcomed you.
Well, there it is, you two. Right in front where you can get all the sunlight when the L ain't passing.
Yeah, this is it all right, Gwen.
Yeah, I see.
I don't want to be nosy, but neither one of you says what kind of work you did.
Well, Gwen writes poetry.
No.
Me too.
Oh. Well, none of the neighbors will mind a bit, but the landlord's strict about the rent. I don't want to be nosy, but I don't see how you're going to be able to pay it, both writing poetry.
I think we'll work that out, thank you.
Now, if there's anything else you want, just don't hesitate to knock on my door.
I think that'll be all, Miss Montgomery.
You say that's not all?
No, she said that will be all.
I can't hear you, Mr. Blakely.
That's all right. Just close the door.
Do what?
Close the door.
You got the door closed, but it never shut out the neighbors in the kitchenette. Or due the sound of the Jackson Park L that caused everything to come to a standstill while it clattered by. And you found the neighbors, friendly. And with your craftsmanship, you could see deeper into their lives and into your own. And all through the streets of Bronzeville, with its inhabitants living as you, circumscribed and barred from high jobs, and yet moving, groping forward, protesting, you saw and wrote.
People protest in sprawling, lightless ways against their deceivers. They are never meek, conceive their furies, and about them early are hurt and shout, weep without form, or surly or laugh, but save their censures and their damns. And ever complex, ever taut, intense, you hear man crying up to anyone.
Be my reviver, my influence, my reinstated stimulus, my loyalty. Enable me to give my gold goldly, to win, to take out a skulk, to put a fortitude in. Give me my life again, whose right is quite the charm of porcelain, the vigor of stone.
And he will follow many a cloven foot.
And when you had gone back through the stacks of poems on the table and the half-finished notes in the typewriter, your visitors shook their heads.
It's quite interesting verse you've got there, young lady,
But just as we suspected, hardly the delicate kind of poetry the society accepts.
I'm sorry.
I think we'll be going now. Sorry to take up your time, but I don't think anyone's going to be able to understand that kind of poetry.
You saw your visitors go, still not understanding, as many others who came to the streets of Bronzeville. But outside, there was already a wide margin of Midwesterners who both saw and understood. And for 3 straight years, the Midwestern Writers' Conference awarded you first prize. And in 1 week, 3 telegrams came from across the nation.
Miss Brooks, the American Academy of Arts and Letters is herewith awarding you its yearly prize of $1,000 for your street in Bronzeville.
The Guggenheim Foundation is awarding you one of its annual fellowships to continue writing your kind of poetry.
For your outstanding work in poetry, Mademoiselle magazine has chosen you one of its 10 Women of the Year.
And as the acclaims came in, You went back to your typewriter in apartment 1, listened keenly, and felt the pulse beat of the people on your street in Bronzeville, a street that had stretched all across the continent.
You have just heard Destination Freedom's dramatization of the story of the outstanding Midwestern Negro poet, Gwendolyn Brooks. Now we are very pleased to welcome to our microphone Miss Brooks herself, who will read one of her latest poems. Miss Brooks.
Thank you. Since I put into some form of writing most of the thoughts I have concerning preserve-making, child-raising, murdering, and freedom, indeed, a decent thought is often so difficult to come by that I wouldn't dream of wasting it, I'd like to offer to you the last poem in Annie Allen. Men of careful turns, haters of forks in the road, the strain at the eye, that puzzlement, that awe, grant me that I am human, that I hurt, that I can cry. Not that I now ask alms in shame gone hollow, nor cringe outside the loud and sumptuous gate. Admit me to our mutual estate. Open my rooms, let in the light and air. Reserve my service at the human feast, and let the joy continue. Do not hoard silence for the moment when I enter, tardily, to enjoy my height among you, and to love you no more as a woman loves a drunken mate, restraining full caress and good, my dear, even pity for the heaviness and the need, fearing sudden fire out of the uncaring mouth, boiling in the slack eyes and the traditional blow. Next, the indifference, formal, deep, and slow, comes in your graceful glider and benign, to smile upon me bigly, now desires me easy, easy, claims the days are softer than they were, murmurs reflectively, remember when cruelty, metal, public, uncomplex, trampled you obviously and every hour. Now cruelty flaunts diplomas, is elite, delicate, has polish, knows how to be discreet. Requests my patience, wills me to be calm, brings me a chair, but the one with broken straw, whispers, my friend, no thing is without flaw. If prejudice is native, and it is, you will find it ineradicable, not to be juggled, not to be altered at all, but left unvexed at its place in the properness of things, even to be given, with grudging, honor. What we are to hope is that intelligence can sugar up our prejudice with politeness. Politeness will take care of what needs caring, for the line is there and has a meaning, so our fathers said, and they were wise, we think. At any rate, they were older than ourselves, and the report is, what's old is wise. At any rate, the line is long and electric. Lean beyond and nod. Be sprightly, wave, extend your hand and teeth, but never forget it stretches there beneath. The toys are all grotesque and not for lovely hands, are dangerous, ferret in open and artful places. Rise, let us combine. There are no magics or elves or timely godmothers to guide us. We are lost, must wizard a track through our own scheming weed.
Destination Freedom is written by Richard Durham and produced under the direction of Homer Heck. The role of Gwendolyn Brooks was played by Wezlynn Tildon. Others were Dean Olmquist, Oscar Brown Jr., Janice Kingslow, Fred Pinkard, Hope Summers, and Dorothy Tate. The special music was composed by Emil Soderstrom and played by Elwyn Owen and Jose Bethancourt. Special effects by Cliff Mueller and William Rosé. And our technician was Al Johnson. This is Charles Chan inviting you to be with us again next week when Destination Freedom will present the first in a special series dealing with prejudice.